Hello, everyone. My name is Dan, and welcome to The Circus Continues Tomorrow, a podcast where I do nothing except ramble about motorsports for as long as I want. Thanks for somehow ending up here, because this is literally my first attempt at creating a podcast. So, some background. TCCT is a motorsports podcast that really is about motorsports in general, mostly from a very casual fan's perspective. We'll primarily cover Formula 1 and MotoGP, because those are the biggest motorsports everyone is aware of and currently broadcast in my country. I'll also bring up some of the lower series of MotoGP like Moto2 and Moto3, World SBK as well, IndyCar, and if I'm feeling particularly desperate, I'll bring up NASCAR and Australian V8 supercars. Those last two I don't wish to talk about because I hate playoffs, but, you know. Anyway, I might as well explain my experience with motorsports as a whole. My first exposure was NASCAR crash compilations on YouTube because, those blowovers were spectacular. And I also like demolition derbies and all, and I grew up playing Turbo Dismount. And, soon enough, I became more exposed to a lot of NASCAR history as a whole, like the big champions like Jeff Gordon, Jimmy Johnson, Dale Earnhardt, Darrell Waltrip, Jaws, and I think even Richard Petty as well. And I could go into more detail on NASCAR, but we're not here for that. But outside of the general knowledge, I never really experienced NASCAR, especially back in the day when internet was a lot more scarce and the online content of NASCAR was a lot more scarce, right? And I appreciate the history and spectacle of the sport. Like, if I were to tune into a race, I think I'll be happy, but I wouldn't like to follow it through a full championship season. Now, starting around 2023, I came across F1's Drive to Survive on Netflix. Yeah, go ahead and call me a DTS fan all you want, but I think the first race that I watched from F1 was the 2023 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, which was very boring, and the season was already over by that point. But what I saw from Drive to Survive was very interesting because, it was a new sport, and I really liked what I saw. So, during that winter break, I started watching a lot more Formula 1 YouTubers like Josh Revel, P1 with Matt and Tommy, FP1 Will, Rocket Power Mohawk, Peter Brook, Mr. B's Garage, Alpha Max Nova 1, and a lot of the meme subreddits of F1 as well, Law VS, and Formula Duck. There's much more that I haven't watched yet, but I give respect to them as well. I also started watching a few of the old NASCAR YouTubers I used to like Slap Shoes and Black Flags Matter, and currently I have LA Productions and The Iceberg being my go-to NASCAR content nowadays. And outside of the official channels of all of these sports, I also I will also give a shout out to Beehive Paddock, being one of the few MotoGP YouTubers out there who's making content for the sport. And those are my inspirations with this podcast of mine. So, 2024 was my first full season in F1. And to be honest, that was easily the best season I could have asked for a first-time watch. Just, there were a few boring races, like Bahrain, Monaco, and Singapore, but, there were so many amazing storylines with, Lewis Hamilton in his final year with Mercedes heading to Ferrari next year. A very minor championship battle because, Lando had to sniff at the title, but Max was going to clean it up anyway. And then you had, wins from Sainz, Leclerc, Piastri, Verstappen, that Alpine double podium. And I think there's a lot more I could think of, but, man, I will say this. 2024 Brazil, I remember watching that pretty much live about, in the middle of the night because it was Sunday qualifying and then the race. The pandemonium in the qualifying list, 5 red flags of all the crashes, and then the race was just cinema as well. Just, I didn't watch every race of the season because most of the Americas leg is kind of in the middle of the night, with the exception of Brazil, really. But, man, that season was just, the perfect season I could have asked for. Just to watch and to hear news about, to watch the YouTubers I enjoyed. It was just, amazing, So, after that, in 2025, alongside watching F1, I also started watching MotoGP because I kind of caught glimpses of it when I was watching F1, but I didn't really care for it at that time. But MotoGP, given it is one of the other few motorsports that is broadcast over here, I thought I might watch it. And while yes, both 2025 for F1 and MotoGP were kind of up and down. Like F1, there was the title battle, but like there were plenty of boring races. And for MotoGP, like outside of a few races, Marc Marquez was winning that championship, like without question. But for highlights of 2025, I'd say the opener in Australia is one, the final 6 laps of Spain, then Silverstone with Lando's home win and Hulkenberg's podium, then Zandvoort with just the chaos happening there, and then Isaac Hadjar's first podium. Brazil, as always, puts on a good show. And then the last 3 seasons weren't like amazing like races to watch, but like those 3 races were like holy shit. We might see Verstappen win the championship after a 100 points gap, but then Norris somehow squeaked his way into becoming champion. Like, not as good as 2024, but like I was entertained throughout the season. Just a lot of moments that we will look back on and think, holy damn. And for MotoGP, like, it was fine. It was very much just the Ducati show with Marc Marquez and Alex Marquez at the front. And there was a few standouts like Jerez, where Alex got his first win. Le Mans, where Johan Zarco got a home win at France. And Silverstone, which had a lot of chaos that somehow got Marco Bezzecchi a win. And yeah, there were plenty of fun battles throughout. Like, if you were preferring more overtakes in your racing, I think you'd enjoy MotoGP more. But like, there I could see Fermin Aldeguer, Pedro Costa, Pecco, even Jorge Martin when he was actually on the track. And it's not the best season I could have asked for, but like I do think I enjoyed watching it every time I did tune in. But I also will say the last 5 races after Mark wrapped up the championship in Japan, and then Bezzecchi proceeded to crash him out in Indonesia. Like those last 5 races were pretty damn good. Like you had Aldeguer getting a win, Rolf Fernandez getting a win, and then Bez and Alex somehow getting a win, and Pecco still falling off a cliff. So that was fun to watch as well. But that was an okay season. I didn't think it was anything special. So this is obviously an episode, my first episode of this podcast, will be about a general summary of the year of this year. I'm being redundant here, but 2026 has been a bit of an interesting year in terms of motorsport. We have new regulations for Formula One, and this is the last set of regulations, the last year of regulations for MotoGP, before they move from 1,000cc bikes to 850cc bikes. CC. I can't pronounce anything today. This is a brilliant podcast already. Sorry for the audio quality. I'm kind of working with what I got here, but yeah, well, what can you do? So, firstly, let's do a review of the F1 season first, because, well, let's just say that to say that it's been less than well received is an understatement, because the fans hate it, the drivers don't like the cars, the teams are kind of corrupt in every way, and the governing bodies are realizing they need to change this effectively and immediately. So, yeah, basically there's a new engine formula for the sport with a 50-50 split between the internal combustion engine and the battery. There's new aerodynamics, boost and overtake modes, as well as the way of charging the battery on the straights called super clipping. I am not an engineer, so I won't be able to explain it to you, but you can find sources for that. But, despite, every single time, like, oh my god, these regulations fucking suck and all that stuff, like, there is still a lot of entertainment to be had in this season, because we do have a genuine title battle on our hands with Kimi Antonelli, or AK Antonelli as I like to call him, Lewis Hamilton in Ferrari, and George Russell in the Mercedes. In terms of constructors, I think Mercedes is the best car, but, well, it's hard to say if Kimi will run away with this title, because, we're just halfway through the season, and given what we know from the last 2 seasons, it could be, he could fall off a cliff too. Who knows, like Piastri did last year, but we'll see, we'll see. And to give a brief summary, I will also go over the kind of my general opinion of like the races from this year. Like, it's been a while, so I had to read, so I had to like go back, watch the highlights, the few like clips I had, and then even like a few the reaction videos from like KR1S, that Chris, that's how you spell it. It's like that one bike. So I think Australia was a good start in terms of entertainment. Like, qualifying had plenty of chaos with Verstappen crashing out of Q1, Antonelli crashed in FP3, but Mercedes somehow get a 1-2. And then in the race, Piastri DNSs. And then once the race began, it was decent. Like, there were plenty of overtakes. Fairly artificial, I will say, but there was plenty of overtakes between both Merc and Ferrari. But and also some stand-up performances from Behrman, Lindblad, Gasly, and Bortoleto, even if it was lucky for Audi to get those points, honestly. And yeah, Ferrari had their usual strategy blunders, and Merc were the definite favorites and fastest cars for that race. And yeah, there were a few initial casualties like Hadjar blowing up his engine, and then Bottas screwing over Ferrari with the second safety car. Well, virtual safety car, sorry. But yeah, it was okay. For as much as we complained about these regulations, how much the drivers complained about the regulations, the actual on-track product was okay if you shut off your brain and not realized that, these overtakes were pretty artificial. I need a drink, sorry. The next race, in terms of the China, we had a sprint weekend. So for sprint quali, Merc was still the best. And in the sprints, Kimi had his issues with starts at the beginning of this year, which I completely forgot about. But George would win and Ferrari would finish on the podium due to Kimi's mistake at the start. Plenty of overtakes in that sprint, even with Hulk causing a safety car, but it was fine. For the main quali, George Russell would develop this battery issue, which might be a major reason for his woes later down this season, but we'll elaborate on that maybe when I have the chance. But Kimi would not only snatch pole, then would go on to win the race, which was amazing. Like, holy crap, he won the race already in this season. But then, that race, if I just pointed towards, hey, Kimi won this race, you think that'd be boring. But that race was still crazy. Like, the McLaren's DNS'd, and then Hadjar spun it on the first lap, and then eventually somehow scored points because Verstappen retired due to an engine failure. And there were plenty of battles. Like, the biggest focus was the Ferraris. There was a bunch of interfighting between them. And plenty of decent battles down the field. Like, Behrman had a P5, Lawson had points from the sprint and the race. Alpine got double points with Gasly and Colapinto, and Colapinto getting some redemption as, he did not score any points last season. And even though Esteban Ocon tried to assassinate him, Colapinto still managed to get that car into P10, And, one of the most wholesome podiums we've had of the season, honestly. So, that was a pretty damn good race, too. Then, Japan. I feel like this is the least memorable of the first three opening races, because I do not remember anything. And then we had that massive month of April where there was no F1 races. I mean, yeah, so Japan was showing even more cracks for the regulations, as well as George's championship chase with Kimi starting to go even more forward. Verstappen got knocked out in Q2 somehow, then Antonelli gets pole again. And for the race, Merc had a pretty crap start, and McLaren were able to leapfrog ahead of them. But soon enough, the Merc and Ferrari were able to fight their way back to the top. But, we're not going to talk about the race. The biggest highlight, or low light, was really the Ollie Behrman crash, which basically blew wide open the criticism to the regulations and made the FIA forced to change things. And I still remember that shot of, after the crash, during the safety car, you just saw Ollie just limping away from his car, and it's good to see him walk away, but it's bad when you know that a driver got injured from a crash, So I think that was the point where okay, these regulations are genuinely unsafe, we need to change things. As for the race, Antonelli won, Piastri got P2, Leclerc got P3, and Russell faltered and came P4. As for the field, down the field, Verstappen recovered to a points finish, and Gasly also got some points, Lawson got some points, and Ocon somehow got a point. I'm not doing any of these summaries justice, but, I'm just trying to let my thoughts ramble on. I need another drink. So after that month-long break for Miami and Canada, which were both spring weekends, the spring quali and the subsequent sprint for Miami, McLaren were just finally able to get their cars working, and guess what? They have some pretty decent cars. Norris got sprint pole, and then McLaren got a 1-2. Antonelli had a bad start and then got track limits, so he finished down at P6. Then for the main qualifying, Antonelli managed to bounce back with his third pole in a row. His third pole in a row. God, I can barely talk today. Then in the main race, just started off okay. I remember just even when I was watching it live, I was thinking, this might be. It was because it was pretty late at night already, so I was thinking, this might be a bit of a boring race. But then about a few laps in, Hadjar crashes, and then Lawson gets flipped over by Gasly. And then we had some decent overtakes for across the field. I do not remember any of them. And then Chuck Leclerc, he was having a battle for I think P3, and then he just completely binned it. Then he just lost it, and then Verstappen and Russell passed him, and then with Antonelli winning ahead of the two McLarens, it was just that was a weird ending to a race. But I would say it was a decent race overall, and definitely the regulations improved with the tweaks that they did over the spring break, effectively. So let's head into Canada, because that's where the championship really takes shape, right? Because spring quali was able to show that Russell was still capable of being above Antonelli, and the sprint was mostly a battle between the two Mercs. And then Antonelli ultimately lost out due to his very aggressive overtakes not really working out. And just after that, it seemed Russell had it in the bag. Quali was going to be the same, with Russell taking pole, and after Lindblad made them do the start again, the Civil War happens once again. It was a battle between both Antonelli and George Russell, and just it seemed like who's gonna win, and then Russell, in a massive case of bad luck, just retires due to a mechanical failure. Just ooh. I guess Toto just decided to shut off the engine after that, so that sucked. So after that, it was halfway through the race too, so after that, Antonelli just went off on his own, and then we had some battling between Hamilton and Verstappen as well for the last two places on the podium. And there was also some pretty bad luck for McLaren too. Piastri collided with Albon, and then Lando had another DNF. Hadjar also had a DNF. And then George just was the unluckiest one there. But in terms of the midfield, Colapinto got P6, his highest finishing position. Lawson, Gasly, and Behrman managed to get some points. And by the grace of miracles, Sainz, in that shitbox of a Williams, got P9. I don't know how he did that, but he got P9. Then we head into Monaco, which, it's boring. It's no overtaking and just But Antonelli got pole, and then after Verstappen stalled and then DNF'd, it was Monaco being Monaco, right? You could see, drivers trying to sneak an overtake, but, because of just how tight the circuit is, it was just not possible. However, when the pit stops started happening, right, there was there were just suddenly a lot of penalties, and the reason why it happened was because there was an error from the FIA. Because Cadillac had two new garages, they had to extend the pit lane a bit. This caused the average speed limit to increase, and their old system was based on the older speed limit, so a lot of pit lane speeding penalties. So there was a lot of chaos from that. It was just long, just the entire grid had that red exclamation mark next to them. But then after Norris DNF that literally everyone forgot about, lap 61, Stroll collides into the wall at I think Rascasse, the final turn, and that sends the safety car out. And then everyone dives into the pits. George gets his penalty fucked up because Mercedes were too impatient and just put the wheels on and just sent him out. It was a complete fuck up from their part, and he got a drive-through penalty afterwards. Then Ferrari did a double stack. So Hamilton, if I remember, Hamilton served his 5-second penalty, but Leclerc was right behind him, so technically it became Leclerc serving that 5-second penalty. Then just as the races were starting, Leclerc just crashes into the final corner, like Stroll did. And after another safety car, they red flagged the race because there was a chunk of asphalt that was just peeled off from that corner. And basically they were okay, we gotta repave this, And after all of that, we had another 7 lap sprint. Then it was just Monaco being Monaco, unfortunately. So, oops. I hit the microphone there, sorry. But never mind, I'll keep that. So, Antonelli won the Monaco Grand Prix, Hamilton got P2, and Gasly got P3. Now, Hadjar, even though he got a fair bit of penalties, he initially got the podium, and that was beautiful. He got to celebrate it on the podium, and it was like, oh, that was a nice wholesome moment. Like, hey, he managed to get a podium. He became the first Red Bull driver to get a podium since Sergio Perez, right? But then, like a few days after, Alpine filed an appeal that led the FIA to give the podium to Gasly. Now, because of that fact, I will freely state that this is the most BS Grand Prix of the year, because there's so much I could go into with this, like the whole penalty system and the whole like podium appeal. It was just stupid, right? But I believe Hadjar deserved that podium, but I won't. I give respect to Gasly for what he's done. He is a capable driver and deserves, that podium. But Hadjar at least got to celebrate it. But I felt that he got robbed, And yeah, that sucks. So let's start. Let's head into Barcelona, because not much else is like, it's Spain. It's Catalonia. It's a good circuit for F1, but we'll head into Barcelona for MotoGP, because oh boy. But in terms of F1, quality was fine. Leclerc rushed out at Q3, and then Russell managed to get pole. In the race, with plenty of overtakes, because it's plenty, got long straights and medium speed corners. Ferrari did a gamble by doing a 3-stop strategy for Hamilton, and then Merck fucked up by trying to respond to that strategy. So very much Hamilton got lucky with another virtual safety car caused by Alonso, and then about like a few laps to go, Antonelli has his spout of bad luck with a DNF, with Hamilton finally taking his first win for the Scuderia, Russell managing to get into P2, and Norris managing to get P3. Did all British podium. Amazing. So that was wholesome to watch. Obviously, there were plenty of other stuff going on, but that's just a general summary. Alpine and Racing Bulls got double points, but yeah, that was a decent race to watch. Wholesome for Hamilton, obviously. Next race was in Austria. It seemed like very much like going to be a Mercedes like victory, and Ferrari seemed to have the edge, but well, let's head into quali first, because that's another controversial moment of the season. So in Q3, at the very end of Q3, as Russell and Antonelli are going to do their final laps, Verstappen crashes out at like turn 9, like the second to last corner. Now Russell lifts off a bit, because it was a single wave yellow, and when it should have been like a double wave yellow or even a red flag at that point. And by using this loophole, managed to get pole, which is insane. Kimi thought it was a double yellow, so he slowed down, and aborted his lap. So I still think that what Russell did was bullshit, but if he ain't cheating, he ain't winning, as they say in NASCAR. So, and in the race, the Mercs were far ahead into the front. So like Russell was at P1, Antonelli was able to just keep it into P3, and Verstappen managed to recover from that crash into P2. And Ferrari did try their 3-stop strategy again, but like they just fumbled that. And McLaren were also fine too. And for Racing Bulls, they also scored more double points. And Alpine, they had a pretty good streak of points from like Australia to Barcelona. This was the first time that they actually did not score any points, which I think was a jinx, really. Okay, Britain, or another one that's going to be controversial. Sprint quality was fine. Hamilton managed to get sprint pole, and in the sprint, well, it was kind of boring, really, because the regulations had the overtakes were just very artificial. Antonelli managed to win the race, and Hamilton and Norris followed close behind. Pretty boring, honestly. In main quali, Russell went off track into the gravel, I think left field, and then Colapinto spun out at like Maggots and Beckett's in like Q1, and then after that, Q3, Antonelli got pole, even though Leclerc was doing, I think he was on the P2 if I remember. And in the main race, Ferrari get an incredible start, so Leclerc and Hamilton are up in the front already. And despite Kimi managing to pass Lewis, like Charles was just way ahead. Like he was like the best driver that weekend. Russell was recovering. Like I think he qualified like he was in Q3 at the end of the day, but he was recovering into the fight for the podium between both Hamilton and Verstappen. But then a slow puncture made him pit, so he got back into P5. Then a VSC happened because Hulk DNF, which is a shame. Still, I was there for the Hulk and podium, you know. But after that, Antonelli got some damage because he was too aggressive on the curbs at Copse. And, like, he was, you know, that car was, like, you know, the aerodynamics were just fucked from that point on. So he was going off the track a lot, and he eventually got a penalty that put him all the way down out of the points. By technically, even before the Verstappen DNF. Verstappen, due to the Macarena wing or a skill issue, just spins out at I think it's the turn after the hanger straight. I don't remember its name right now, but like he DNFs, he's angry, and then the race then ends under safety car with no last lap shootout. Very anticlimactic, but you know a lot of people were angry about that. But like you know, I think the reason why people were angry about that was because there was a graphic that the safety car was ending, but I remember like the safety car was just still out, did not pull into the pits, and then they came back. It was just like you know. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was a bad end to a race. Like you had Leclerc winning, Russell getting P2, and Hamilton got P3. Russell managed to jump Hamilton in the pits in the safety car that Verstappen caused. More points from Racing Bulls, double points, and Bortoleto managed to get Audi some points as well for the first time in a while, and Alpine had some more points as well. But I will say the biggest highlight was definitely when Kimi had his issues, and he was just like, and Mercedes was like, hey, okay, you got a problem, let's retire the car. And like Kimi's like, no, I want to fight for at least like a point. Like the guy had some fighting spirit, and that I commend, you know. All right, next is Belgium, which Spa is a great circuit, but you know there's good reason why these regulations are like, or actually no, most modern regulations are kind of not fitting for this circuit. But you know what can you do, right? In quali, despite with plenty of grid penalties for Norris, Hadjar, and well Stroll, but like no one cares about Lance Mark at this point. Antonelli got pole as usual, and in the race, after the Kemmel Straight, I forgot what the fuck a chicane is called after the Kemmel Straight. I can barely think. Russell got fucked over by Hamilton. Like it was very much a racing incident. Hamilton just lost control and bumped into Russell, and that put him out of the race. He got penalty after that, and then I think lap 8, Leclerc and Piastri were fighting at that same corner, and then Piastri and Leclerc collided, which somehow Leclerc didn't get a penalty, and Piastri kind of had nothing to do. After that, there were plenty of overtakes. Like there was some fighting, but like, and a few like phantom cautions, like VSCs that no one had like an explanation for. Maybe like a bit of debris or something, but like that was like very brief for like a few. Like even I think the first one didn't even last a lap, and the second one at least lasted like 2 laps. That caused for Ferrari to pit. And despite Antonelli getting fucked over by the VSC, he was able to fight his way back to the win, passing Leclerc, who finished in P2, and then Verstappen somehow wound up at P3. Bortoleto got more points, Lindback got some points, and Colapinto also got some points, so that was lovely to watch. And we head into Hungary, our most recent race, and I can remember it more because I was watching it live. Like it literally happened by the start of this recording session. Sorry, I hit my table. I'm recording this like 2 days after the race happened, so I could remember most of the details more. So practice, like I could see just everyone was struggling at that track for some fucking reason. But like despite the difficult track conditions, in qualifying, Norris managed to wrangle that car into pole. Then Verstappen spun out, like at the very final corner, just screwing over Kimi because he thought that he could do the Russell loophole again, but he couldn't, so he got a penalty for that. And then Hamilton impeded Piastri, which then sent him down the grid as well. Also, big highlight, Aston Martin managed to get Fernando Alonso into Q2 with their big upgrade package, which, Ooh, that changes things, right? So in the race, Piastri managed to get ahead of everyone because at the start and then after that, just the tires were just not working with anyone. Ferraris were slow on the hards. Mercedes were much more worse than the usual 1-2 standards that they have, and McLaren were having some pretty crazy radio drama. Flashbacks to Hungary 2024. That was an insane race. Even though there was no on-track overtakes, there were a lot of radio drama. I'm suddenly starting to talk in a British accent for some reason. Holy crap! All right, there were plenty of radio drama from McLaren. So after that, just Norris managed to win out because Piastri pit first, and then he was put into traffic on accident, and then Science, due to him ignoring blue flags, his engineer, or he just stopped giving a shit, collided into Piastri, which made him the angriest I ever heard Piastri in a while. And then Piastri then unfortunately DNFs due to a gearbox issue, which is a shame because, wow, Norris went up, was in front, and there was plenty of chaos because of the back markers. Just there was a lot of traffic in that second half of the race. You could see everyone trying to pass with a few other back lapped cars in front of them. But Norris won, first win since Abu Dhabi. No, not Abu Dhabi. I think it was his first win in a while for this year. And then Verstappen, despite hundreds of complaints about his Red Bull, managed to get P2 and ultimately managed to get the best possible result with a P3 for Mercedes. I'll also give another shout out to Racing Bulls continuing to get double points, and Hulk got his first points for the season, which was amazing. And lastly, Aston Martin, from this race onwards, were no longer back markers, which is a miracle, really. We'll see for the rest of the summer break, but I'll elaborate there. Okay, so we've done the summary of the F1 season already, which, was pretty long, but we had to go over the details anyway, and I needed to remind myself of what happened over the past year. So let's move into the 2026 MotoGP season, which is much more interesting than F1, I'll be honest, but by this point of the season, we have a potential 5 or 6-way title fight on our hands, which, infinitely better than F1 already. And like with F1, I'm very sorry if this is inaccurate, because I had to go through, the qualifying highlights, the sprint highlights, and the race highlights, and even some of the practice highlights, because, well, there was a lot happening, I also will bring up some Moto3 because of some compatriotism, I'll say. But let's start off with Thailand, whatever you want to call it. So after a Sepang test and an absent Fermin Aldeguer because he unfortunately broke his femur in a training accident, which is a shame, qualifying got off to a very strange start. We had Bez who got pole, Marco Bezzecchi, who got pole, and then just crashed afterwards, meaning that he got the pole anyway. And this will be the first, just there's a lot of things I could talk about Bez for this season, but we'll go on a race-by-race basis, right? So for the sprints, for MotoGP, we have sprints and races for each weekend, which is a lot more races for, the entire riders grid for the sport. But, I'll be honest, a lot of overtaking, so I don't mind. It's more racing. For the sprints, the first 2 laps of the Thailand sprints were a battle between both Marc Marquez and Marco Bezzecchi. And then, Bez then slid out from one of the corners, and then it became Pedro Acosta versus Marc Marquez. So for the next dozen or so laps, it was just between the two of them for the win. And you had Raul Fernandez in the background. But, at the final corner of the penultimate lap, Acosta, I think, went for a pass. And then Marquez is on the inside. And then he seemingly bumps into Acosta, which pushes him off to the runoff. And then Raul is, on their backs already. And this, in the span of a lap, they had to investigate and then give him a penalty. And, Marquez got the penalty, meaning that Acosta managed to get his first ever win for MotoGP. It was a sprint win, but we'll take whatever we get with Acosta. Marc Marquez finished P2 and Raul finished P3. For the main race, thank God, Bess manages to keep the bike upright for the start of the race. Marquez got swamped by the bikes behind him from Raul Fernandez, Jorge Martin, and Pedro Acosta already. Pedro battles with Jorge, then Jorge and Mark gets into the fight with Pedro, Jorge. Then Marco Bezzecchi and Raul Fernandez head off to the front. It's like I have to somehow say these names because they're pretty hard to pronounce, and also it's really hard to say like their short versions without any context, but I'll try my best. Then, as I think Mark passed Pedro and Jorge in like one overtake, which was amazing. Then like about lap 20, Mark suffers this massive puncture that just like I think he got damage from the curb that destroyed the wheel and just knocked him out of the race. And then afterwards, his bro Alex Marquez crashes. And then for Ayagura, the other bike in this, we had him pitching off P5 because he has some incredible late race pace. Honestly, we'll see more of that down the line. And then Pedro Acosta manages to pass Raul Fernandez. So the podium was Bez P1, Pedro P2, and Raul P3. So for a very brief moment, Pedro Acosta was leading the championship. Okay, Brazil. This was a new race for MotoGP at the Goiânia circuit. I think it's called the Circuit Ayrton Senna, which is interesting. But the lead up to the weekend, there was a lot of rainy days that led to a lot of flooding in the region. Like I think the track itself was flooded for like the first few weekdays of the week, and then Friday was a pretty wet weekend. What was a pretty wet beginning for everyone. So it sent most of the top grid to Q1, and then Q2 was even also just as chaotic with several crashes and mistakes from basically everyone, which led to Fabio Di Gianantonio somehow getting pole. Like, oh man, we're off to a great start. So the sprint, there was a fair bit of decent racing. Mark managed to get ahead of Digia, and with a few laps to go, With a few laps to go, Jorge Martin manages to get his first sprint podium for Aprilia. Mark wins the sprint, and Digia gets the silver medal. Kind of boring. Okay, now we're going to head into Moto3 for a bit, because I would like to make mention of this. So, it was, like I will say, I won't be able to do justice to what Moto3 is, because it is very, very different than MotoGP. Like, you can see, like, races between one-on-one bikes every so often. In Moto3, you see, like, pack racing. Like, you will see at least either half a dozen or a dozen, like, bikes fighting for the win, which is amazing. A lot of overtakes at one time. It's a lot. So, in Moto3, there was, I think, like, halfway through the race, like, there was a lot of racing and overtakes. There was a crazy high side from David Almanza. I think halfway through in Moto3 for the Brazil Grand Prix, they had a crash from Scott Ogden, which caused a red flag. And by the grace of God himself, we had Veda Pratama getting P3, an Indonesian rider for this year, I think a rookie as well. And the Aspar bikes of Maximo Quiles and Marco Morelli managing to get 1 and 2. Well, Moto3's championship is decided by this point. Maximo Quiles is winning that championship, but we'll cover some of the Southeast Asian representation for this podcast, because I am Malaysian, and you might as well show some national pride, right? Okay, so in the MotoGP race, even just because of the flooding, right, that happened the past week, there was also a lot of issues with, I think, the track surface. So the track was literally just disintegrating, with the race distance being shortened from 31 laps to 23 laps. Bez, at the start, manages to get in front, with Jorge Martin fighting his way up to P2 by about lap 6. And then we have some decent racing from Acosta and Alex Marquez, and then Digia fighting with Mark for P3. So by the end of it, Aprilia 1-2, Bez leads the championship, Jorge gets his first race podium for Aprilia, and Digia gets P3. And, like, I remember after the race, like, all of the riders were, like, showing their battle scars, because there was chunks of asphalt that were just hitting their bodies as they were riding on the bikes. And, like, there's plenty of things to criticize, about that race. So, yeah. My cat's currently here, begging for attention, so you might hear some purring. Anyway, we then head to USA at the Circuit of the Americas. I did not watch this race live because it is at 3 a.m. and I have a kind of shoddy sleep schedule, and I don't want to stay too late for that. So that was the only race I didn't watch live for this season, at least for now. And in quali, there was plenty of traffic woes that led to Bez getting a grid penalty for the main race, and then Digia managed to get pole again somehow. And in the sprints, Bez got a horrible start, and then Francesco, or Magnaia, or Pecco as I will refer to him, got a great start, and then led for a bit. And then Marc Marquez slips out, and then takes out Digia, both out of the sprint. And then Jorge and Bez fight their way through the field into the podium places, and then Bez crashes out with like a few laps to go. And then Martin is battling with Pecco for the sprint win by like the last lap itself. It's like within the last lap, he does like an overtake at like one of the final corners, and then after winning the sprint, the guy celebrates on the back straight with a wheelie that he immediately crashes out, just like while trying to get back on two wheels, which is insane, right? Pecco finished P2 and Acosta finished P3. And in the main race, Acosta and the Aprilias, which now that I say that is a great band name, got a great start with Pedro leading for a bit, and then Marco Bezzecchi passed him before both collided slightly, causing some debris happening at the, I forgot what turn it was, but like near the back straight. They then battle a bit for the podium, and then the TV direction head watched Agura fighting through the field, and it seemed like the guy was going to fight for the podium, but then he got a DNF due to a mechanical failure, which was gutting for him, honestly. And then afterwards, P5 was a pretty nice battle between Bagnaia, Marc Marquez, and Ania Bastianini. And then Aprilia got 1-2, and Acosta P3, Bez and Martin. Jerez, or the Spanish Grand Prix, I call it Jerez just to make it easier, because there's like 3 races that happened in Spain for this year, so. Yeah, what do you want? You want to make a comment, Kitty? It's alright. So, Jerez. Like Friday was pretty uneventful because it was dry, but like Saturday was raining, so I think qualifying there was like water on the track, but it wasn't raining, so there was some minor chaos. Mark managed to get his first pole in qualifying from Johan Zarco and Fabio Di Gianantonio, with the Grassinis, Ducatis of Alex Marquez and Fernando Guerra crashing out, and Jorge Martin also crashed out. Then the sprint was like dry at the start. Alex Marquez managed to fight his way into P2, and Zarco fell behind, unfortunately. And, it was standard, like a repeat of 2025 almost. But then, like a few laps to go, just rain starts coming down, and then as the rain's pouring down, like I think near the start, Marc Marquez fell down at the last corner, and then he heads into the pits, just cuts through the grass, heads into the pit lane, and then in the chaos of everyone else swapping their bikes to switch to wet tires, and then a few others just crashing out, including Alex Marquez, Bez, the Pramac Yamahas. It's a Ducati 1-2 with Pecco leading for a little bit. And then, like 3 laps to go, Mark then passes him and then wins the sprint and keeps the win despite the controversial circumstance that he switched to the wet tires bike. Pecco finished P2, and by some miracle, both of the VR46 Ducatis finish in the top 4. Morbidelli managed to get a P3, which is a miracle, honestly. And then in the main race, which was fortunately in blue sky weather, Bez got a good start into the podium places with the Marquez brothers fighting for the win. Lap 2, Mark crashes out at turn 11, and then the 2 factory Aprilias follow Alex Marquez behind. Then Digia then passes Jorge for P3, with some more battling in the midfield. Then Pecco retiring with another mechanical issue. But Alex Marquez, like with last year, manages to win the 2026 Spanish Grand Prix. That Bez finishes P2, and then Digia finishes P3. So, France. There was pretty chaotic Friday, which Marquez had to be in Q1
for Saturday. Because there's to explain for the F1 fans that came across this podcast. In MotoGP, you have free practice 1 and then practice, which is basically if you finish in the top 10 of practice, you can go straight to Q2. And then you have on Saturday you have free practice 2 and then qualifying. You have Q1 where you have a bunch of people fighting for the last 2 spots to advance into Q2, and then you head into Q2 and then fight for pole. So Marquez in Q1 sets the lap record at Le Mans, the Le Mans Bugatti circuit. And then in Q2, he isn't able to replicate that brilliance because, to be honest, I don't think he could have, even if he had the exact same circumstances. So Pecco manages to get pole with Bez right behind him in P3. And then the sprints, which I think it was I think the next day, actually, it was raining. It was still dry on Saturday. In the sprint, after getting a great start, Jorge Martin in, I think, P7, gets into P4 by, like, turn 1. And then by turn 2, he pulls off this insane triple overtake, heading into the chicane, passing Pecco, Mark, and Bez into the lead of the sprint. Like... Holy shit, like, that was insane to watch live. And then, like, with another Aprilia 1-2, like, Mark suddenly starts getting swamped up by the field. Like, Pecco, I think Pecco was, like, P3 at that point. Or was it P2? I don't remember. But then, like, we had Quartararo. I think Zarco was in the mix as well. I think even Morera, if I remember. Or maybe it was Marini, I don't remember. But then... Just chaos, really. At the final turn, like I think throughout the race, there were a few crashes. First it was Bastianini, then Franco Morbidelli, and then Raul Fernandez. And on the final lap, Marc Marquez then has a massive high side, which just slams into the ground and fractures his toe, meaning he is out of the race and for the next race in Catalunya. So the sprint finishes with P1 Jorge Martin, P2 Pecco Bagnaia, and P3 Marco Bezzecchi. Okay, now in Moto3, it was a wet race. I'll bring it up because I want to bring this up because in Moto3, it was a wet race that Maximo Quiles won, which, yeah, it's pretty boring, even though there's plenty of battles throughout the field. But our focus right now is Adrian Fernandez, who is the younger brother of Raul Fernandez. He was doing pretty well in the first few races of the season, but then I don't know which Grand Prix it was, but I think it was definitely after Catalunya. He got disqualified from all of them because the stewards discovered that they had tampered with his engine, which disqualified him from like a few podiums, which is a shame, but it's the team's fault, honestly. And because of these DSQs, that promoted Veda Pratama into P3, which another Southeast Asian podium, which is nice. And in the main race, because Mark was out, Bez manages to get the lead, and Jorge is unable to replicate his sprint overtake, because he got boxed in by the other bikes around him. And Quartararo, the French devil himself, attempts to look at the podium, but it wasn't going to happen. That Yamaha is shit. So we then have Acosta versus Bagnaia for a bit, and then Martin recovers by passing both Di Giannantonio and Quartararo for P4. And then Pecco crashes out at turn 2, if I remember. And then Jorge passes Acosta. So it's a really 1-2 again. And then Agura, who has some incredible late race pace, passes Acosta for P3. And then it's an Aprilia 1-2-3 for the first time in their history. And then Martin passes Bez. So Jorge manages to get his first race win for Aprilia, as Ayagura also gets his first ever podium, ever. So that was really wholesome to see, too. That was, nice. It was not, as wholesome as, last year's race in Le Mans, but we'll get into that's a story for another day. And then, oh boy, we head into Barcelona de Catalunya. It was a blessing in disguise that Marc Marquez wasn't around for this one. It started off normal enough with qualifying, seeing Pedro Acosta managing to get pole. And then in the sprint, it's a battle between Pedro and Alex for the win, and Johan Zarco was somehow in the podium places, and then the other top guys eventually get past him. Raul Fernandez got into P3, and then Digia got into P3, but despite Pedro's efforts, Alex got the sprint win with Acosta second and Digia third. Decent sprints, it's like, Alex is going to shine for this. Maybe Acosta can get lucky with the race. Okay, then the race. The first 12 laps of the race were fine enough, It was looking like a repeat of the sprint as it was Acosta and Alex fighting for the win. But then Raul, Jorge, and Zarco were also in the mix. Like Pedro and Raul fought for the lead for a little bit, and then Alex fought back into P2, and then Alex and Pedro kept fighting. And then at the half point in the race, on the second straight heading to turn 9, like Pedro's KTM just gives out on him. And then Alex then clips the back, and then next thing you know, both the De Grissini Ducati and Alex are just fucking destroyed. Just the immediate red flag. Digia gets taken out by a stray wheel from Alex's bike. And that was horrible to watch live. Alex would suffer some fractures in his collarbone and vertebrae, but he was fortunately alive for that after that incident, and everyone was worried. So then, after Pedro and Digia managed to rejoin the race, because Pedro, he managed to bring his bike into the pits, and then Digia just walked back into the pits to get on another bike. So we had a standing restart as usual with red flags. But like at turn 1, Zarco, Bagnaia, and Luca Marini, and even Ogura, who kind of got clipped, just completely pile up. Like it's mostly Zarco, Bagnaia, and Marini that got piled up into the turn 1 runoff. And then Zarco got his left leg like stuck between the back wheel of the bike and like the frame. So he was just flopping around. He was just tossed around, which was like horrible to watch too. Like the man has been out of the season since this incident, and they caused another red flag, So I won't go in. He suffered, if I remember, some damage to his ligaments, his meniscus, and his fibula. And the man is out of the season because, he's rehabbing, he's got to heal. But he is hopefully coming back for September, which I think is in Misano. But I wouldn't be surprised if he sits back for the rest of the year, Let his leg heal, Man, watching that race, I remember thinking, boy, this race has had some interventions from God himself to guarantee Pedro Acosta a win on that KTM. Like, it was horrible watching that stuff happen, certainly, but like, if these are the blood sacrifices it took for Acosta to win on that KTM, then, we'll take it, right? Anyway, the second restart fortunately goes well. Jorge Martin gets taken out of P2 by Raul Fernandez, and Joan Mir is somehow in P2, as Pecco is somehow back in P3. However, Digia, who's, rejoined this race already, manages to fight his way into the podium, like, slowly through some miracle, And then he then dispatches Pedro for the lead. And we see Acosta watching on as defeat is snatched from the jaws of victory as his KTM's tires just die a slow and painful death as Aldeguer gets him off the podium, and I think it was Joan Mir passed him, and then Aldeguer passed him, and then as he's battling with Ayagura at the final lap, at the final corner, Agura bumps into him and crashes him out of the race. Just like, man, like that was probably sucky for him to feel. Like, it definitely felt like, oh man. So, final result was Digia getting his first win in a while, then Aldeguer getting second, and then Pecco getting third. As for Joan Mir, well, Mr. Crashtastic himself was put down to P13 due to the stupid tire pressure rule, which I won't go into detail, but all you need to know is that it's bullshit. But hey, at least Mir got to celebrate on the podium, right? And also, Marco Bezzecchi, who was pretty much nowhere this entire race, still outscored his teammate in the championship fight. Like, just this race, well, I would refer to this race as absolute cinema, but like, it was the worst Greek tragedy put to film. Like, even like I remember like looking on the subreddit afterwards, like everyone felt horrible about that race. Like I would say that was an insane race to experience, but I don't think anyone wants to watch that again, you know? So after all of that, let's head into something a lot more wholesome with Mugello. The not the track name is Mugello. It's called the Italian Grand Prix, but you know there's another Italian circuit on the calendar. But whatever. Mugello was a new. Mugello was when Marc Marquez was coming back into the championship, and with Alex and Zarco trapped in the hospital, it's truthfully only up from here, right? In quali, Aprilia managed to get a front row lockout with Marco Bezzecchi on pole, and in the sprint, Marc Marquez manages to head into the lead at turn one, with Diogo Moreira, the reigning Moto2 champion and like contention for Rookie of the Year at this point, up into the podium places as Raul and Jorge Martin head back into the top two, and then Bez dropped back, and then Digia starts fighting with Marc and then Diogo Moreira, and then Bez and Marc pass Diogo, and by the end of it all, despite some chasing from Jorge Martin, Raul Fernandez gets the sprint win. Jorge is P2 and Digia gets P3. I'm not doing this race justice, but it was a damn good race. Also, to switch over to a more fuzzy feeling, in Moto3, my fellow Malaysian, Hakim Danish, yes, I am Malaysian. Hi, how are you? Assalamualaikum. Hakim Danish was doing pretty decently on that weekend, and he was on pole position for the race because David Almanza, who was the pole sitter for the race, fell sick for some reason, and I still have no source as to what exactly his ailment was, but Hakim Danish was on pole position. And as I said, it's beautiful racing of like a dozen 250cc bikes fighting for the win. I can't do a perfect summary of this race, but with plenty of overtakes and passes, near the very end, Max Quiles, who's dominated this championship this entire time, has a mistake, which then sends him out of the top 10, with Marco Morelli, his fellow Aspar teammate, bumping into Danish. And then, by the grace of miracles, we have a 1-2 from KTM Ajo, I don't know how you pronounce that, from rookie Brian Uriarte, Alvaro Carpe getting P2, and my fellow compatriot Hakim Danish in third. Like, that was amazing to see. Like, Hakim Danish is the first Malaysian to finish in the podium since Khairul Idhampawi in 2016, so that was really nice to see. And as for the race, we have more wholesome moments because the Aprilias managed to get a good start, and the trackhouse of Raul ran wide, and he was at the back of the pack by the end of it. Soon enough, Pecco starts fighting for the win, which he manages to overtake both Bez and Jorge for a bit, and then we see some battling between both Pedro and Marc Marquez, and then Aldeguer was also in the mix as well. And then after the halfway point, Bez and Jorge pass Pecco for the win, and then Marquez versus Acosta just continues, and Agura is also trying to get into that fight as well. So, and then Pedro and Agura collide, which then brought Digia forward, so just a lot of chaos in that. Marco Bezzecchi managed to get P1, home win for him, which was brilliant. Martin finished P2, and Pecco hanged on to P3, despite Agura charging towards him. It was just brilliant, wholesome fun, you know? Now then, Hungary, at the Balaton Park circuit. I always think it's Balatro Park, but that's just me. So, in quali, at the start of Q2, like Marc and Digia went down at turn one, but despite that, Marc Marquez got pole ahead of Acosta and Aldeguer. And in the sprint, Bez got into third, but Furman then tried to fight back, and then he got swamped by Raul Fernandez, and then nothing happened. Like, it was pretty boring, honestly. Like, there were like some, these fights might be happening, but it was just like them just going around that boring circuit. And yeah, it was pretty boring. I think Mark won, definitely. I do not remember it. I do not remember that. I think Mark won. I think Acosta was second, and I do not remember who was in third. You know? I know. But in the main race, Jorge Martin went bowling. Let's just say that. He completely lost control, slammed into Marco Bezzecchi, Fermin Aldeguer, Fabio Di Giannantonio, and Raul Fernandez, taking basically all of them out. Digia was the only one to rejoin, but he was stuck at the very back of the field for the rest of the race. And on lap 2, Acosta managed to pass Marc for the lead, then tried to build a gap, but he just wasn't able to do that. And then further down the field, Bastianini went wide at some point and it bumped into Joan Mir, and with Bestia getting a penalty. Agura was also doing his late race brilliance, just fighting with Marini and Jack Miller and Diogo Moreira for the P4 to P6 range. And then Marc and Pedro started fighting for a bit, and then Marc then passed him by lap 17, and then for the rest like half a dozen laps it was just that. Agura managed to get into P4 by the end of it, but Marc Marquez got his 100th win overall in the Grand Prix motorcycle racing canon, effectively. And then Pedro got P2, and then Pecco got P3 in a very lonely manner. Luca Marini somehow got P5. Miller somehow got P8, despite being on that shit Pramac Yamaha. And Iker Lecuona, who was subbing for Alex because of his injury, and he's the Ducati rider for World SPK, got P7 somehow. Yeah, that was a pretty boring race. I understand why people say that this Balloton Park is like the Monaco of MotoGP, but what can you do, right? So, we have another race that I think is going to be a bit more wholesome. The Czech GP in Brno. So, quali was kind of boring, but Ogura managed to get pole, which was nice to see. In the sprints, Pecco got in the lead with Ogura and Marc behind. And, it was pretty boring, honestly. It's like, it was basically that for the rest of the sprint. But then, about 2 laps to go, Marco Bezzecchi crashes out, and then crashes out again in the gravel, because he was very angry. Like, the guy was, I think, in P4 or something, and he was, like, so fucking angry. Like, as the marshals were trying to get his bike, he then slapped the marshal. I understand, Marco Bezzecchi, I'm not going to blame him for lashing out in anger. Like, he did a James Hunt, effectively. Like, that's just, sometimes that happens, right? But he got banned from the race because of the incident, and, it is deserved. I wouldn't say he needed to be banned for the rest of the season, but he lost some valuable points, and it's his fault. So that incident at least got punished. Now, to be more wholesome, though, in Moto3, well, I could go into everything about just the entire race. But all you need to know, just for the sake of this podcast, was that on the final lap for the 6-way battle for the lead, it was between Max Quiles, Uriarte, Carpe, Almanza, Hakim Danish, and Veda Pratama. Like, they were just fighting for the win. Then at some point, Quiles and Uriarte bumped into each other. Oops, jeez. I hit the mic again. Okay. So Quiles and Uriarte bumped into each other again. And then Hakim Danish just gets way ahead, managing to get the lead, and then wins the race overall in dry conditions. And as a Malaysian, that was beautiful to watch live. And Pratama also got P5 too, so that was nice. And yeah, that was lovely to watch. I just don't know where else I could say this, really. In the main MotoGP race, from the start, Ogura managed to keep the lead, with Pecco and Marc then trying to fight for it. Then, soon enough, Bagnaia and Marquez pass him for a Ducati 1-2. Then, after the halfway points, Marc managed to get ahead of Pecco. Then, Ogura, with his late race pace brilliance, managed to pass Bagnaia. However, it isn't enough to top Marc, and he manages to get P1. Marc Marquez manages to get P1. Ogura P2, and Pecco P3. All right, we're almost finished there. All right, we head into Assen, or the Dutch GP, or the Assen Tourist Trophy, right? So Alex Marquez returned from his injuries, which was nice to see. And in quali, Jorge Martin manages to get pole. Luckily for them. And in the sprint, Trackhouse, Ogura, and Raul got the upper hand, with Raul fighting his way into P1. Digia managed to get himself into P2 somehow, with Ogura then holding up the factory Aprilias behind him. Soon enough, Ogura passes Digia to make it a Trackhouse Sprint 1-2 finish with Digia P3. And in the race, Raul somehow manages to get ahead of Jorge Martin again, and then Martin then fights back and gets into P1. Trackhouse 2-3 for the first few laps, and then Bez and Mark were also fighting. And then, like, near the final sector, Bez just loses it and crashes out at high speed in that, like, turn 11 or so, if I remember, or turn 12. So he was just like, he was fortunately not too injured, but, you know, more valuable points lost. So that's a shame. And then afterwards, we had some battles between both Mark, Pedro, and Pecco for, I think, P4, if I remember. At the halfway point of the race, Pedro succumbs to carpal tunnel syndrome. No, I'm not joking. He was suffering from carpal tunnel, which he had to have surgery to replace, and he just decided to retire at that point. Then Pecco had a mechanical DNF, which was a shame, but, you know, what can you do? And then soon enough, Trackhouse of Ogura and Raul managed to pass Jorge for the lead, and then Ogura manages to pass Raul for the lead. And then right afterwards, Marc Marquez tries to pass Fabio Di Giannantonio at, like, the final chicane, but this causes them to just recreate a 2015 incident instead. And I don't want to go into detail on 2015 because, you know, I don't want to die, you know. But soon enough, it becomes a 4-way scrap for P4 between Digia, Alex Marquez, Marc Marquez, and Enea Bastianini. And to put the cherry on top, Ayagura manages to get his first ever win for MotoGP. Raul P2 and Jorge P3. Aprilia 1-2-3 twice in one season. And also, for another wholesome fact, Alex got P5 somehow. Kind of crazy given what he's been through, right? Okay, final race of the summary. I promise we'll head into some interesting parts after this. Germany at the GP at the Sachsenring. In quali, I think in Q2 or Q1, I don't remember, Marco Bezzecchi crashed out, and he was knocked out of the entire weekend due to a broken collarbone, which, a shame, but, you know, what can you do, right? Marc Marquez got pole, and then Alex was behind him in P2. And then in the sprint, Ayagura, I think he started about P5 to P4, I don't remember, leapt ahead into P3 before Digia, who was in P3, got back into that position. Then it was like Hungary. It was nothing happening. Marquez 1-2 with Digia P3. Like, 2025 repeat somehow. Then, in the main race, Agura leapt ahead into P3 again and then held it because after a few laps, Digia crashed out. Then, a third of the way into the race, Alex then also crashed out. And then nothing happened for a bit. Then Agura then passes Raul Fernandez about 2/3 of the way into the race. Eventually, Mark wins with Agura second and Raul third. Yeah, so boring race. At least there's another race next week, which is the British GP. So we'll head into that soon enough. Okay, so after that needlessly long summary of both the F1 and MotoGP seasons and some of Moto3, we can head into a look back of what we've learned. Sorry about that, I just needed to get my thoughts on all those Grand Prix somewhere, you know? And, let's do an analysis of the standouts and disappointments of the year. You know, the winners and losers, the bangers and clangers, the best and the worst, whatever you want to call them. These are my disappointments of the year and my standouts of the year. Let's start off with F1 first, because there's plenty of talking points of that one, right? So, disappointments of the year, I can split them up into 3 categories. We've got the ones that improved in Hungary, the ones that started off strong, and the biggest disappointment of the year. So let's start off with the first team that we have to cover, that being Aston Martin. Okay, look, I think all of us, some of us probably bought into the hype. I did not believe in that hype. I thought they are not going to be like top runners by this year. Absolutely not. But I was not expecting them to be literal backmarkers for the first 10-ish races of the season. I cannot say that. And they were just they were out in Q1 most of the time. They were not capable of winning races, or no, not winning races at all. They were not even capable of finishing races from like the first few races of the season because their car was vibrating their drivers to death. And like even then when the car started finishing races, it was just slow. It was at least Cadillac, you could point to them and say they're a new team. They're not like going to become like the Grand Prix winners or championship leaders or anything. They're new. Let them have some time. They're going through growing pains, right? Aston Martin, they are one of the richest teams on the grid, and they just, after all, with all the money they've thrown into this project, with Honda's backing as well, it's like it's just disappointing, really. Like, you knew that it was going to be. You had low expectations. But holy fuck, But unfortunately, Hungary, they've had their big upgrade package, which has, by some miracle of Adrian Newey either being a genius or the engineers of the factory, they've managed to put themselves firmly in the midfield. No longer are they fighting with Cadillac; they're up there with Haas and Williams. So there may be a chance. There may be a chance. I don't think maybe they'll get some points. Who knows? But for the first half of the season, they were just nowhere really. And we have the next team kind of follows in that same vein, but in a much less extreme degree. So the second disappointment of the year is probably McLaren. Now, the highs of 2024 and 2025. McLaren were the constructors' champions, the reigning drivers' champions with Lando Norris, and it's a new regulation cycle. They have the Mercedes engine, the best engine on the grid, and really they should be fighting with Mercedes at the very minimum. And the first few races, it was just not there. Like, obviously Piastri had a crash at Australia. China, they DNS'd with both cars. And there have been flashes of brilliance. They've had podiums. They've had some point scores. But they also had some pretty low lows, right? Canada, Piastri crashed into Albon. Lando has DNF'd from mechanical failures at least twice now. Had to take a grid penalty at Belgium. It's not exactly like... it's not the worst season they've had. It's better than whatever the hell was going on from 2015 to 2018. But it's compared to the highs of last season. Yeah, it's a noticeable step down, right? And but Lando, well, he's got his win in Hungary. Piastri has had a massive bout of bad luck with the Sainz collision and then his gearbox just conking out on him. So hopefully it's up from here, but I don't know if they can bring this momentum forward, then hey, that's good for them. But comparatively, I would say McLaren are my second disappointment of the year, and our third disappointment of the year is Nico Hülkenberg, or Nico Hülkenberg, as Daniel Ricciardo used to say. I think comparatively, like, you're not going to get another podium. Like, Nico's not going to get another podium. It's just, even by the biggest of miracles, right? I think really Audi have... I wouldn't say they've disappointed me. I think the reason why they've disappointed me... They haven't disappointed me. I'm being redundant here. I think Audi are a decent team. They've just been stuck in P11 most of the time. And Hülkenberg has just had the short end of the stick with terms of reliability. And Bortoleto has been getting more out of that car on multiple occasions, right? And I would say, just overall, compared to what Sauber were able to do last year, yeah, it's a bit of a step down, right? But you can give the excuse of they're a new team. There's going to be growing pains, and you know, it's not the end of the world, right? At least you're better than Cadillac and Aston Martin, right? But yeah, in Hungary, Hulkenberg finally managed to get points, and looks like Audi's upgrades are at least working. So hopefully it goes up from here, right? Now, okay, the next two disappointments are in the category of starting off strong, but falling off a cliff. And the first team I have to bring up is Haas. I am a fan of Haas. I know that's insane for me to say, but it's better than being a Ferrari fan. But Haas, I support them the most, not really because not just because I like them as a team, but also because, to be honest, if you've watched Drive to Survive and know what that team has gone through with Günther Steiner and all that, they need the support, And you root for the underdog. And the first the first 6 races of the season were pretty decent. We had some decent points, some high points with the first 3 races of the season, and then we had a few lower top 10 finishes with both Ocon and Behrman getting some points. But just they've been outdeveloped, really. Obviously, they're the smallest team on the grid, and they don't have the financial backing of other teams to bring upgrades as strongly as fast as they should be. And it is a shame because Ocon, it's likely he's probably going to be out of the sport by the end of this year. And Behrman, God, I really want him to be in a better team than Haas, right? I feel like he deserves either. I'm not saying he should be in Ferrari. At least I just want him to be in the top team. Like, I don't know. It could be any of the teams up there, but Ollie is a very talented driver, but that car or his injury from Japan is just not letting him be able to shine at any point, which is a shame. But if I still have some hope because last year Haas did have a pretty good late run of form from like Singapore to Las Vegas, and Ollie nearly got Haas their podium in Mexico. So we'll see if Haas are able to get back into the top 10 at some point, but hopefully. But with all the other teams having upgrades, it's unknown if they can even get into the top 10, right? And speaking of starting off strong and falling off a cliff, George Russell, Woody from Toy Story, Mr. T Postman, whatever you want to call him. At the very start of this season, everyone was saying George is going to win this championship. He is Mercedes had the best engine, the best chassis, they had the best strategy. Everything was in favor for George. And then Kimi leveled up, and then reliability was turning its head, and just I've seen a lot of people say that this is likely going to be a repeat of 2025, right? Because it's like Russell won the first race, like Lando won the first race in 2025, and then Piastri had this run of form that he was just winning races back to back to back, and Max Verstappen got in the way every so often. But it's like, but at least Lando in 2025, when Piastri won, he was at the very least he was second. With George, there has not been a Mercedes 1-2 since China, which is insane to think about, because in Japan and Miami, he finished 4th. Canada, he DNF'd, obviously. In, I think, Monaco, in Monaco, he was completely out of the points. In Spain, he at least finished 2nd, but Lewis jumped ahead of him in the standings. And it's looking very likely that the title fight will be between Andrea Kimi Antonelli and Lewis Hamilton instead of a civil war. And I think Ferrari were going to fuck it up anyway, but it's after like several years of being in a Williams and then being in a much worse Mercedes and then finally being given a car that could challenge for the title and your teammate is just beating you. I am not jealous of George Russell's position, and there's a lot we can say about George and Mercedes as a whole, because Well, there's probably some corruption in there because of Toto, but let's not get into that at the moment. But I do think George will at least bounce back. If this is following the 2025 narrative again, we might see a bad run of form of Kimi or bad luck from Kimi from in terms of reliability or just pressure going to him. Who knows? But it really is disappointing from the hype of the start of the season to where we are now midway through the season, right? But I think George has the capability of at least being able to win a few more races. I will at least a race, you know. Mercedes have the best chassis, they have the best engine, despite what the ADO wants to say. But hopefully Russell and Haas are able to pick themselves back up, right? However, I cannot say the same. All of these five, Aston Martin, McLaren, Haas, Nico Hulkenberg, and George Russell, you can at least look at them and think, oh, okay, they might get better. You know, there might be hope, right? But the biggest disappointment of the year, if it weren't for Aston Martin just being backmarkers, if it weren't for Cadillac just existing, really, the biggest disappointment of the year is Williams. Will.I.Ams is just... Okay, 2025 was a brilliant year for them. They were the best of the midfield. Alex Albon was scoring points consistently, and Carlos Sainz, despite some teething troubles, was able to get 2 podiums for the Brackley squad, right? And James Vowles was saying, next year is going to be our year. This is where we're going to be fighting for the top with the top teams, consistently fighting for podiums or even wins, getting consistent points. And goddamn, what a fall off it has been. Just, I'm not going to say, I mean, like, I feel like 2025 was like what 2026 wanted to be, but like it just came a year early. And yeah, just Williams, either due to financial backing, a flawed chassis design, because they have the Mercedes engine, but they just haven't been able to use it as effectively as other many teams. And you know, it's looking very likely that either Sainz or Albon or both or James Vowles are going to be dropped or leave or get fired from that team, because Williams are just, you know, nowhere. They, like, at least they were ahead of Aston Martin, right? They were out of Q1, but like sometimes they could sneak into Q2. But now with Aston Martin looking better, they might not have nowhere to hide at this point. Williams will likely, well, they'll at least finish at least 10th. At the maximum, they could finish at least P9 now. They could reasonably finish 10th if Aston Martin really get their act together. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could say about Williams, obviously, especially even with like Hungary, with Sainz just deciding that he wants to ignore blue flags. But yeah, there's that Williams are easily the biggest disappointment of the year, just from the heights of 2025, and then to 2026 now, where this year was supposed to be their year, and it's looking like it's just going to be not what they wanted at all. Yeah, they're the biggest losers of this season. All right, now let's head into some happy hour. That's the negative niceties dealt with. Let's see who's the positive peoples of this year. And we're starting off with our standouts. We're starting out our standouts with Alpine. Now, 2025 was horrible for them. They were stuck with the worst engine of the grid with that Renault engine. And despite Gasly being able to fight for the points, Colapinto was just nowhere. And it seemed and they were just dead last in the constructors at that point, so they just stopped caring after like halfway through. But with a new engine, the Mercedes engine, by all means the best engine on the grid, they finally have gotten their act together. Gasly has scored points consistently and managed to get a podium at Monaco somehow. Colapinto has finally redeemed himself of the criticism against him during 2025 and being able to score points at various points
at various races. And yeah, Alpine is the most improved team, at least in terms of last year. Because, I mean, last year they were 10th. Now they're 6th, you know? As of now, Alpine, they're starting to look shaky. I think it's just being outdeveloped compared to Audi or even Racing Bulls. So I think they'll still score some points every so often in the back half of the season, but I wouldn't say they're going to wind up 5th. But hey, at least they'll wind up 6th at the minimum. Speaking of Racing Bulls, they're also a standout of the year. Obviously, last year, Racing Bulls were pretty decent. You had Isaac Hadjar being promoted up to Red Bull after a very solid performance throughout the season. Liam Lawson has redeemed himself from the lows of a two-race stint at Red Bull, and then picking himself back up into a decent midfield driver for Racing Bulls. And now with rookie Arvid Lindblad as the only rookie of this year, he is also shown to be probably the last correct choice that Helmut Marko will ever do for Red Bull. They have scored double points for I think most of the season really, and they haven't had any reliability issues. They haven't had any bad weekends, at least comparatively. Like if a bad weekend for Racing Bulls is just some one car being out of the points, which isn't that bad really, but I'm going to say they're not as good as Alpine, mostly because there is some spiciness happening in that garage, because there is a rivalry between Liam Lawson and Arvid Lindblad just brewing up. And the best way I could describe this is that Liam is a guy that has been through the Red Bull fold and is the face of the new rebuilding phase of Red Bull. Right? They're no longer are they the party guys that are ruthless with their drivers. They're trying to rebuild themselves to be a more team-focused affair, right? And then you have Arvid, who's, a rookie. He's aggressive. He wants to prove himself. And, he's based around that philosophy of you either sink or swim, from Helmut Marko's junior program. And I will elaborate on when that rivalry will come to a head. But, Racing Bulls, they're doing pretty damn well, and definitely the best of the rest. Speaking of best of the rest, Isaac Hadjar. Now, we could talk about the Red Bull second seat curse, just generally. We could talk, compared to Liam or Yuki Tsunoda, Hadjar has been doing pretty damn good. He's not exactly, actively challenging Max or anything, but he's at least finishing in the same positions as Perez, at least back when Perez was still at Red Bull. Red Bull, at least, he's very consistent in the points. He's gotten one podium, technically. And in terms of reliability, his bad luck mostly comes from reliability and the occasional odd race here and there. But he's outscored Max Verstappen a few times already, so I think the Hadjar, for now, in this rebuilding phase of Red Bull, is the best second driver they could have possibly asked for. And if Verstappen were to walk, I think Hadjar would be a fine replacement for the number one seat, And I wouldn't say the second Red Bull seat is cursed, nor is the curse gone either. But I think Hadjar, he is shaping up to be the future of Red Bull when Verstappen eventually leaves. But who knows? I think we'll see if Hadjar is able to keep up this momentum for the rest of the season. But hey, at least he's the best Red Bull driver since Daniel Ricciardo, Moving on, let's talk about Gabriel Bortoleto, whatever you want to pronounce his name. In terms of last year, he was pretty damn good in that Sauber. Despite finishing 19th, he had double-digit points compared to Franco, at least, but the midfield that year was just tight, pretty much. And to this year, he's
pretty much on the back foot, obviously, because Audi's a new team. There's teething troubles. But with the trajectory that he's been showing in the past 3 or so races, it's showing that Audi made the best choice in keeping him because he is proving to be a reliable driver that can get into the mix of the points if needed. But it's just the car is just not fast enough to challenge Racing Bulls or Alpine, at least not yet. I say if Alpine gets worse in the back half, I'd say Audi might be a consistent point scorer, and they might pass Williams and Haas for the like P7 or so, which is insane to think about. But I think. Well, I'm not saying that Audi is going to score a podium at any point soon. That like what happened with Hulkenberg and Silverstone is never going to be replicated again. But I think Bortoleto, I think I could see him getting more points in the future for this year and next year, wherever Audi heads towards next. And my final standout of the year is a certain Andrea Kimi Antonelli. Now, Antonelli, I think even we were all expecting Antonelli to just be, he's a new driver. He's being put into probably the best car of the grid. He's so not going to beat Russell if Russell is able to, lock in, right? But, 7 wins, 9 podiums, 6 poles, and a championship lead of 70-ish points. Yeah, I mean, the expectations were there, but I don't think we were expecting the possibility of the youngest Formula One championship winner ever. So I think Antonelli has certainly surprised me in that matter. Whether or not he is able to win the championship, I won't say, but it's his championship to lose. So I think even if he doesn't win the championship, he's done incredible. He showed incredible talent throughout this year that he will definitely win a championship, at least in the near future, right? But, we'll see. I'm not going to jinx him, All right, moving on to MotoGP. There's not really as much of disappointments and standouts. I'm not going to go into major detail. But for my first disappointment of the year for MotoGP, Toprak Razgatlioglu, I do not know how to pronounce that name. It's hard to spell and even harder to pronounce. So, Toprak is a 3-time World SBK champion. He won in 2021, and then he won in 24 and 25. So, he is, hot commodities. He's a hot commodity in the paddock. He's a very talented rider that has proven that he could dominate championships. The problem is that when he moved to MotoGP, he is on a Pramac Yamaha, and Yamaha are the worst manufacturer as of now. And yeah, I mean, at the very minimum, the bar was low. Toprak had to at least, score some points and get Rookie of the Year. That's really the goal that I would have set for Toprak, but yeah, just because of how the Yamaha is built, it's just not showing his talent. And Diogo Moreira has been a really damn good rider for this year. That it's very likely Moreira will get Rookie of the Year for this championship. And Toprak, I hope Yamaha get their act together with the next regulation set. But if you're expecting the 3-time World SBK championship let me rephrase that. If you were expecting the 3-time World SBK champion to dominate MotoGP on the shittiest bike of the grid, then, I'm sorry, that's just, you were setting yourself up for failure already. I will say Toprak has been scoring pretty consistently in the points, and he could possibly get a top 10. Jack Miller has gotten a top 10 somehow already. And the other Yamahas, he's at least beaten Alex Rins and Jack Miller on a few occasions. He's equaling Fabio Quartararo at least. So I think he's not the worst rider of this year, but I think comparatively to what he's had before, yeah, it's disappointing, right? Now then, the next two are
disappointing, but more of like sad, depressingly so, because the first team that I will discuss is Gresini Ducati. Alex Marquez and Herman Aldeguer showed brilliance on the Ducati GP25 last year. Like, Alex was able to get multiple wins, second in the championship, several podiums. Herman Aldeguer also was Rookie of the Year, several podiums, one win, and a lot of points. So I think this year you were expecting them to be, either up there with the top teams or, just helping at least like consistently in the points. But it's mostly due to injury as to why they're disappointing. Like, obviously Aldeguer got hurt during the during the beginning of the year, and he missed out on the first race, and then he had a pretty long period before he even managed to get points, or at least it took a while for him to get into a podium position. Then for Alex, he started off well, but I think the Ducati this year isn't as strong as the Ducati last year, and and obviously the Catalunya accident was a big factor in that. And he's shown to be decent, at least in this season, but compared to like Marquez, Digia, and even like I'd even say Pecco, just both Aldeguer and Alex Marquez just aren't as strong as previously. And Pecco's had his woes, but I think that's more to mechanical DNS rather than like his own doing compared to last year. But just I think Aldeguer has been out for a while since I think an injury at the Dutch TT. I completely forgot to mention that. But yeah, I mean, compared to last year, this has been a step down. But I will say the next disappointment is probably the one that makes me sad the most, and that is Johan Zarco. Sorry. How do I say this? Zarco, I mean, he's not going to be a guy that's going to finish on the podium or win a race. But at the very minimum, the guy was going to finish in the points, right? He is shown to be, even in his older age, he's shown to be a very capable rider on that bike. And I think what really cemented it was really the Catalunya accident. Obviously, we can point to that and feel sympathetic for Zarco, but that was his fault. He was unable to slow down in time and accidentally got himself hurt. So yeah, and he's also being beaten by Morera, even the factory Hondas, whenever Marini is able to show up and Mir hasn't crashed. So yeah, Zarco, I feel, because especially the highs of last season, you really do feel for the guy. Like, you want him to succeed, but he's been out of the season since Catalunya, and while I hope he's at least able to come back, I really do hope he takes the time to rest, heal up, rehab, and come back to when he is at his best shape, right? So those two are sad. But then we head to, I think this is not exactly a disappointment of the year, but probably like it is a disappointing string for this next rider, Marco Bezzecchi. Now, at the beginning of this year, he looked to be the championship favorite. Like, sure, in the sprint, it's really like the sprints were not exactly kind to him. He DNF'd from like the first opening three, I think like the first few sprints of the season. But in the races, at the very minimum, he got a win, and he was at least on the podium, right? Win, or at least was on the podium. But after Mugello, like, something happened. Either he made a deal with God to give him such bad luck that he could get a home win, that he's throwing away this championship to Jorge Martin, Marc Marquez, Ayagura, hell, even Di Giannantonio if he's able to get a decent run of form. Like, I think what really cemented Bez as like the disappointment was definitely the Scheck incident. Like, you shouldn't slap a marshal. Control your emotions, But, and then, Hungary, that was not his fault. Jorge just went bowling.
And then the Dutch and German Grand Prix. Just he's been injured. He's been ruled out due to injuries, and he really needs the summer break to just recoup his losses, heal, rehab, and hopefully he will get better by the back half of the season. Whether or not he will win the championship, that's hard to say, right? But I think if he does not win the championship, I will declare him. I will state definitively he would be a disappointment of the year. Right now, I'd say he's disappointing, but not the biggest disappointment. I don't think there is a very big disappointment for this year. I mean, yeah, there have been pretty bad riders, at least in MotoGP. Joan Mir is crashing out of every GP he seems to be participating in. You've got Maverick Vinales, just at the very back doing nothing. Brad Binder just getting his ass handed to him by Pedro Acosta, and Jack Miller, Alex Rins, and Fabio Quartararo just stuck on a Yamaha. But yeah, I think those are the main disappointments of the year for MotoGP, at least so far. So let's head into the standouts of MotoGP for the year right now, and let's start off with Ai Ogura. Now, last year, Ai Ogura had a pretty quiet rookie season compared to Fermin Aldeguer, at least. Like, the guy was decent. His qualifying was shit. And in terms of the race, he showed brilliance in the race pace for whenever, like, in the longer races, he's shown that he could pass through the field at the very end of those races. And, he was at least in the top 10 most of the time, but, he was quiet. He wasn't, like, getting wins or podiums. But now, with that Aprilia underneath him, the guy's leveled up. He's shown that he is a very capable rider. He's got his first podium. He's got his first win. He's got his first pole. And he might have a sniff at the championship title, but I do not think he's going to get that from Marc Marquez. But, it's Marc Marquez, one of the definitive GOATs of the MotoGP season, and just generally, you are not beating Marc Marquez in a championship fight, even if luck is on your side. But yeah, I mean, compared to last year, this has been the biggest improvement in terms of what Ogura was capable of. So yeah, I think yeah, he's definitely standout rider of the year. Another standout rider is Diogo Pereira. Now, Moto2 was the one championship that season that had an actual title fight that went to the last race. And it looked odd if Pereira didn't win the championship by the end of the season, despite having a contract with Yamaha, it would have looked a bit bad. But, the man did it. And to be honest, I would say that Pereira has been pretty standout just in general. He has scored a few top 10s already. He's been consistently fighting even near the front on a few occasions. And well, yes, he's had a few unlucky crashes. In terms of what Honda is capable of, he's the lead Honda rider, in my opinion. And for being the Moto2 Rating World Championship, I think it still gives merit to the championship there. But yeah, I think there's not much else I could say about Diogo. I will say about Moto2, it is an embarrassment that Manny Gonzalez is not getting a MotoGP seat despite being guaranteed to win the championship this year. Just it's a shame, But next up, I think the biggest good surprise of the year was definitely Di Giannantonio. I'm relatively new to the sport, I will freely admit that. But last year, the VR46 Ducati wasn't as strong as Gresini's. So I was thinking, this guy might just be decent. And I thought they were decent. He got a few podiums here and there, but I didn't really think of him as a standout rider. He did what he needed to do. He scored points, he at least finished the race. But he certainly leveled up with this next season, probably with the Ducati underneath him being the better Ducati of 2025, because I think Gresini and the factory Ducati team are using the GP26 machine, and VR46 is using the GP25 machine. So Digia is able to get more out of it compared to what Grissini and even the factory Ducati team are able to do. So I mean, he's not going to win the championship. He's kind of in the fight, but I wouldn't say he's going to win the championship. He's had his few unlucky moments. He's had a few crashes as well. So, yeah, I think Di Giannantonio is a big surprise for me. But I wish him luck on his KTM factory seat next year. Speaking of KTM, though, I know I won't. Pedro Acosta is a very good rider. He's been able to bring that shitbox of a KTM out into positions it really shouldn't be in. But I'm gonna give my flowers to Enea Bastianini because he's currently the second best KTM rider on the grid. Maverick Vinales is going to be out by the end of this year. Brad Binder, despite scoring points every so often, he has been. Enea Bastianini has been like the best KTM rider on more than a few occasions. Obviously, he's had his accidents. He's had a few unlucky moments as well, but I think Bastianini deserves some flowers as being the second best KTM rider, at least on the grid for the time being. And the man should deserve a better seat than that KTM, really. But, we'll see if Gunter can bring that Tech 3 KTM team to somewhere more. Well, I'm not sure, given his track record at Haas, but we'll see. And lastly, I've already covered Moto3, but in a championship that is dominated by Maximo Quiles, I think Hakim Danish and Veda Pratama are definitely standouts. Obviously, I'm following Moto3 just because, I'm Malaysian and Southeast Asian. You gotta give your boys some support, right? And Hakim Danish, he was decent in the first few races of last year where he debuted. And I feel like he's had circuits that he's not been good at. Like USA was the one track I think he's not been good at. I think that's either for whatever reason. But he's on that MSI machine, which I would say is a sort at least upper team for Moto3 because he had Angel Piqueras last year, so I think Hakim is getting the most out of that machine for being to not only drag it to a podium and a win, but I think it's to be expected from MSI, even though Yamanaka, his teammate, is kind of crap. But I think the more impressive rider is honestly Veda Pratama because he's not only scored 2 podiums on that thing, one on merit and one on technicality, but that guy's on a Honda in a field of very powerful KTMs, right? And Calaxes, I think. So, and I think really he deserves the flowers. I think I just remembered the CF Moto exists, but for Veda Pratama, I think he deserves more respect compared to Hakim because he has been compared to the machinery they're based on. The fact that Pratama is even in contention of a podium alongside Danish is worth praising. And yeah, Pratama has had his few unlucky moments and crashes on his own fault, but I think it's looking good for the Southeast Asia rep for this sport with these two in the mix. Though whether or not either of them will win a championship in the near future, I do not know. But we have our hopes up, Okay, now then, this wouldn't be a motorsports podcast without some predictions. And since we're at the halfway point of the season anyway, I have a few predictions for each of these sports for what will happen in the back half of the season. And let's start off with F1 first. For my first prediction of the rest of the season for F1, I think George Russell will at least win 2 more races before the year end. I think, he's on the best car. He's got to at least be on the podium at minimum, And sure, it's likely that Kimi might win the championship before him, but I think Mercedes have been strong on circuits with long straights and hard braking zones, so I could see Mercedes be very strong around Baku, Monza, Sepang, technically, Mexico, Qatar, maybe even Abu Dhabi. So outside of like maybe Singapore, I could see Mercedes being strong at most of the circuits for the rest of the season. Even Madrid, I would say Mercedes. That's very much an unknown. But the main thing that I will say is really Russell needs some luck on his side. Not only does Kimi need to either DNF or struggle, he has also got to have the Ferraris, the McLarens, and even the Red Bulls not be in his way in some capacity. Whether or not that will happen, I do not know, but I believe at the very minimum, Russell will at least win one more race. However, I will boldly predict that he will at least win two more races. And, well, if I don't get that, then, well, that's on me. But I predict that George Russell will win two more races. And my next prediction is equally as likely, but I think a lot more destructive, and that being the Racing Bulls will collide with each other to the point where both will DNF. Whether it is in the sprint or whether it is in a race, I believe that Liam and Arvid will collide into each other at some point and knock both of themselves out of the race. And that will be a long talk in the Racing Bulls garage afterwards, but I think it's going to happen. They've had a few bumps and scrapes a few times throughout this season, and they've been battling each other for basically most of the season. It's really a question of, they are going to collide with each other. Where it will be, no one knows, but they've been well behaved compared to other teammates before, but I think they will definitely collide into each other, and I think when they do, it's going to be a very bad collision that both cars will be out of the race. I don't want to say if it's going to happen at a track, because it could realistically happen anywhere, but it's going to happen at some point or another. Next up, I am going to boldly predict that Aston Martin and Haas will score points. Now, Haas, I think, given that Ollie Behrman has been strong in Singapore, Mexico, Abu Dhabi, and what else? Brazil. I think there's a chance that Behrman will be able to score some points for Haas at some point. He's been strong around the back half of the season since last year. But Aston Martin, it really depends on where their upgrades bring them. If they're able to be in the mix, or at least have some reliability luck from the other teams, or bad luck from the other teams, they could reasonably get a point. At very minimum, they could finish at least like P10. Obviously, Aston Martin have already scored a point in Monaco, but I would point to that as being on a technicality because everyone got penalties that fucking race. So I could see them getting points on merit at least at some point of the season. I don't know when or where, but it might happen. That's my bold prediction. However, my boldest prediction will be that I see Isaac Hadjar getting a win in that Red Bull. Now, if Red Bull, now obviously he is not only up against Max Verstappen, who knows that car better than anyone else. He's also up against Kimi Antonelli and George Russell. He's up against the Ferraris of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc. He's up against McLaren with Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. I could see the win either happening at least in Zandvoort, given his podium last year, or somewhere else entirely. Like, it's hard to say where the Red Bull Ford is powerful, at least in this season. It's been fairly inconsistent and pretty difficult to drive for both drivers. But by some miracle, I really do wish to see Isaac Hadjar win a race this season. If not, then, well, Max Verstappen will leave, and hopefully Isaac will have his flowers by then. All right, next predictions. These ones for MotoGP. I predict that Marco Bezzecchi will win the sprint and race of a race weekend. I mean, like, it's going to happen. He's on the best bike of the season, and he's been able to equal Jorge, Raul, Marc Marquez, and Agura for a race win. So I could see him at least getting a race win and a sprint win at some point, but I think it might happen at least both a sprint win and a race win happen on the same weekend. He's been strong around the Asian leg, around Malaysia, Indonesia, and Australia. And like the last few races, I think he could reasonably get that, judging from last year, honestly. But I think, I think Mark Bezecchi will bounce back at the very minimum. At least, if not, then well, at least he'll cement himself as the biggest disappointment of the year. But who knows? My next prediction is Toprak top 10 finish. He has scored now in MotoGP. The points go from first to 15th, and Toprak has been pretty much at the bottom of the points usually, mostly because most of the other riders are DNFing. But I think it's possible Toprak will get a top 10 finish at some point before the season's end. Whether where it could happen, I could see Portugal happen, given his experience in World SBK. Maybe Aragon, if we want to be early. But we'll see, because I think Toprak is a talented rider. It's just that he needs to not only get some luck, but also push that Yamaha into the top 10. And he's just not been able to do that, you know? We can call that growing pains and all that, but I think Toprak is capable of at least getting one top 10 finish before the season's end. Now, for a Moto3 prediction, I believe Hakim Danish will get a P2 before season's end. He's gotten the bronze medal at Mugello. He's gotten the gold medal at the Brno. And I think he will at least get P2 at some point. Or at least a podium at some point in the season. Either like within Malaysia or for a home podium or like somewhere else. But I think I like to just see him get a P2, just to complete the set. He's got all three medals at some point. I could see him getting a P3 at the very minimum again, but I think it'd be nice to see him get a P2 once, and I think it might happen this year as well, given his form. And lastly, well, as I said, we have a near 5 to 6 way title battle for this season. We got Jorge Martin, Ayagura, Marc Marquez, then Bezecchi, then Di Giannantonio, and even Raul Fernandez, if you want to include him. The right, I can barely speak to it right now. I don't know who will win the championship. Just it's up in the air really because of how tight of a battle this is. They're separated by like about 20-ish points, but in terms of the rider I'd love to win, I would like at least it to be one of the Aprilias. Whether it's Bezecchi, whether it's Martin, whether it's even Agura, or Raul, if he's managed to even get to that point. I think I want one of the Aprilias to win the championship, and also for Aprilia to win the Constructors' Championship as well. Or Teams' Championship, sorry. But, I mean, I have to say, like, if I had to hedge my bets of who I think will probably win based on what I know of them, I think Marc Marquez will win this championship. I'm going to say that it's just, he's unstoppable. He's one of the best riders of the entire sport. And really, like, with Martin and Bez just making mistakes that cost them points, Agura not really being as strong as I think he's as Bez or even Martin on their best days, I think Marquez might be able to run away with this championship even before the season's end. But we'll see. Whether or not anyone gets injured is really the main factor of what decides this championship. But as to who I think will win the championship, I think it will be Marc Marquez. So, just a summary of my predictions. I think George Russell will win at least 2 more races. Racing Bulls will collide with each other and DNF. Aston Martin and Haas will score points. Isaac Hadjar will get a win for Red Bull. For MotoGP, we got Bez winning the sprint and race, then Toprak top 10 finish, Hakim Danish P2, and Marc Marquez winning the championship. All right, then. So, we might as well end on a positive note, right?
And I think the best way I conclude this pilot episode is for me to discuss the most recent news that we've had for Formula One, and that being Malaysia coming back to Formula One after 8-ish years, and or 9-ish years now. And it's under weird circumstances, obviously. Uh, as stated, April had no F1, and that was because both the Bahrain and Saudi Arabian Grand Prix were cancelled due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East between both Iran and USA. And it's a shame, and it's very also looking likely that Qatar and Abu Dhabi might be cancelled. So Formula One, because they need the money from the Middle Easterns, are scrambling to find replacements for these races. And Malaysia was a likely option, but I really didn't think there was a chance. But Bahrain were like, hey, let's have Sepang host the Bahrain Grand Prix. So, yeah, Malaysia will be hosting the Bahrain Grand Prix on the 2nd of October to 4th of October, about a month before the MotoGP Malaysian GP. So, it's a bit weird, obviously, because there have been examples of F1 races being named like one country despite being held in a different country, like the Swiss Grand Prix happening in France, the Luxembourg Grand Prix happening at the Nürburgring in Germany. But this is easily the farthest away a country that is hosting an event is is having the event happen in a different country, like thousands of kilometers away. And yeah, it's strange, certainly, but Sepang, it's nice to see Sepang back. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons why Sepang was dropped off the calendar. Just comparatively, they weren't getting the ticket sales, and MotoGP was more appealing to the Malaysian residents. Like, if you are Malaysian, you understand why motorcycles are important to this country. But the thing about Malaysia, especially now, like, I would have asked, if I had to ask Malaysia to be brought back at any point in time, I would have asked at least, like, for them to keep it from, like, 2018 to 2019, and then 2020 COVID happens, and, they can cancel it because, COVID, China. But I think they would have liked it to come back at least by afterwards, like, at least by the ground effect era. I could see it reasonably doing well. In this regulation set with all the super clipping and batteries, it might be a bad race. Might be. I'm not going to say it's going to be a bad race, but it could possibly be like a meh race at worst. But if it is a good showing, then I think it will be a good thing for both the sport, the circuit, and really the fans and the drivers too. I will say, like, this, I could really only see this being a one-off, maybe like a second race, probably next year. But the reason Malaysia, truthfully, was dropped off the F1 calendar was because Singapore exists. And, Malaysia had the Grand Prix back in 1999, and then Singapore was not only the first night race in F1 in 2008, but has proved to be just as challenging as Malaysia. Like, Malaysia is a circuit designed for more overtakes. Singapore is a street circuit meant to be an endurance battle. And not only was Malaysia, like, it used to be like right after Australia in the early days, but like soon enough it got shifted towards the middle of the season alongside Singapore, and that really killed, I think, the popularity of it because, which is better? Singapore, which is right smack dab in one of the most advanced cities of Southeast Asia, or Sepang, which is in the middle of nowhere, right next to an airport that's kind of also in the middle of nowhere. So, yeah, I mean, really, the only way I could see Malaysia coming back was either something really bad happening to Singapore, or, something like this. Something happens to other circuits that F1 wants to replace, and yeah, Malaysia just happened to get a race for this season. It's not officially listed as a race on the F1 app. Let me go check, actually. I think it is listed as a race on Wikipedia, on the Wikipedia schedule, so I don't know, but it will be very interesting to see Malaysia come back to the sport. Whether it'll be a good race, I'm not going to bet on that, but I think it's good. It's good to have it back. You know, I'm happy that it's back. Whether it will stay back, I don't know. But yeah, that's the end of our podcast for today. Thank you for listening, and I've rambled on for over 2 hours at this point. But if you stuck around listening to my shitty audio mic and my shitty opinions, then thank you, genuinely, thank you. I will only make this podcast whenever I have the time really for it, or whenever there is a gap in the schedule so I could actually talk about it. But yeah, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and if you want more of this, please subscribe to my channel. I will try and get some episodes out before the end of the year, and by next year I'll hopefully make this into a full-time thing. So yeah, thank you. Like the video, dislike the video, who cares? The algorithm will appreciate it. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Daniel. This is The Circus Continues Tomorrow. Goodbye.